Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning.
I'm here with Carob Bartholomew, and I'm so happy to see you again and have a chance to talk with you today. And Carrie joined us on a Solid Ground live stream not that long ago, and we had a great conversation. I felt it was very fast paced and really a lot of information, a lot of great discussion came out of that. And I thought it would be really nice to have a chance to just sit one on one and have the opportunity to hear a little bit more about you and a little bit more about your experiences around this ideological subversion of culture that we've been experiencing, and what your thoughts are. And the way we met originally was you reached out to me after I put my first Antioch video up and invited me to come on your show that you host on your YouTube channel, which is called Be Not Afraid. And we had a really lovely conversation then. So I appreciated that opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
The same. It was very surprising to see that mental health, you would think that would be the last bastion of a place where people could go and feel safe. It's literally that safe space is no longer safe.
Yeah, it was really surprising. And I also realized that probably a lot of people weren't aware of how significant the issue was there. So thank you for your interest in that and for helping to get that information out. And so could we start maybe just, would you talk a little bit about yourself, a little bit of your background and kind of how you entered this conversation, how you come to be involved in the big issues that you've been so passionate about?
Sure, yeah. Anybody who saw your episode knows I aged out of the foster system. So when I was 8 years old, I put myself into foster care because I saw I saw really low expectations, just a very low, even as an 8 year old, I could look at life and go, this is not what I want. And so I lived in 18 foster homes in 9 years. And everything in life has been a series of decisions. And I'm proud of most of the decisions that I've made. There's some things that, I wish I would have done differently, or I wished, but part of that is going to college. And I'm kind of glad I dodged that bullet.
Mhm.
Um, but all of the sudden in 20, was it 2020? George Floyd. When George Floyd happened, it was like life completely got taken away. Like
Mm,
everything I valued, everything that was me became nothing but the fact that I'm a minority.
mm,
And that was something I was not willing. I'd never looked around. I'd never seen the world that way. I don't look at people and say, um, they must have animosity towards me, or they must um, want the worst things for me. I just don't look at life through a lens of resentment.
mm, mm,
And to be told that I'm supposed to, and worse, to be told that this little human that I brought into the world is supposed to look at life that way, was something I was not willing to compromise on. So that's how it started. And then um, in 2020, with election season, I saw a lot of people who normally would never have conversations, would never, just the Asian and Black experience didn't usually mesh. That's just,
mm.
and I have interviews with people where we talk about it. Um, and all of a sudden, I was watching these people who were pretty quiet, pretty, my viewpoint back then would have been kind of elitist,
Mm.
uh, opening up and talking about it and being very frightened of situations coming towards us. So I started listening to them, and what they were saying started to make sense. And so I just decided that I was going to be a truth teller. I was going to tell people not to be victims, and I was going to tell people um, to not just trust blindly. I think it's good to trust when things are proven, but I don't know that there's a lot of things proven right now. So I just think people shouldn't trust blindly, and they should. We're being taught right now in our schools to look at things through a very specific lens. And I think that's a very limiting worldview, where if you take the little hole off of your glasses, then you can actually look at the world, and see other people's perspectives. And I think that's the healthier way to look at life.
So you really had a rich and complex backstory in your own life prior to coming into 2020 when things, my goodness, my kids are being so loud with the dog right now. I'm sorry about that. I may have to mute in a minute and holler at some children.
Sure.
We'll see. So
I thought it was a horse.
it's a tiny dog, a tiny
My
little,
goodness.
yeah, she's like this big, but this loud. So
I've got one.
yeah. So it sounds like despite you had a very challenging upbringing, and it sounds like you took a lot of responsibility for your upbringing on yourself. Okay, one moment. I'm gonna holler at some kids.
Sure.
All right. So that's how we do
Okay.
things around here. We just turn off our video and we holler at our children. Sorry. So, but you took a lot of responsibility on yourself, even from a really young age, when you say that you placed yourself in foster care. And then the experience of going through 18 homes in 9 years, that's incredible. That's so much change and so many different experiences. I'm sure you could write books on just what that was like for you. And but the way that you tell the story, it's with a sense of agency.
Right.
And
So
yeah.
I think it's important to understand that there was one person who was with me the majority of that time, and that was my counselor.
Oh, wow.
I had an amazing counselor, Paul Martin, and no matter where I went, he remained my counselor. I don't think that's necessarily normal, but I just think that it was a beautiful relationship, and I definitely wished that I was just like, why can't you just take your foster license out and adopt me? Why can't your family take,
Oh,
you know,
oh.
because he would show up when I was packing up and moving to the next house with my black garbage bag.
Wow.
He would be there, and he would advocate for me and
Mhm.
say, this is a good kid. She doesn't deserve to be in juvenile,
Mm.
But the thing is back then, I'm getting way more teary than I normally do. But
Oh.
back then, adopting light-skinned Black girls was not the currency that it is today.
Mm.
So as soon as someone was upset with you for any reason,
Mhm.
they would call and just have you moved
Wow.
very, very fast. You go to school and come home and your bags would be packed, or
Wow.
your garbage bag. So, but I realized really early that if I brought this chip on my shoulder,
Mhm.
if I brought this chip on my shoulder, that there was nothing. I also had another person, and I think I spoke about him before, my teacher, Mr. Garza.
Mm.
So two men, that were just very good souls. And in retrospect, I'm pretty sure that Paul was homosexual
Mhm.
and Mr. Garza was Hispanic.
Mhm.
And this is in the early 90s.
Mhm.
Neither one of these, I mean, both of these would have been marginalized people, but they were wonderful people.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So both of those two people taught me, um, yeah, that I had agency, that I had a right to plan and make decisions for my life and to carve out what I wanted my life to look like.
And it sounds like the relationships with them, with Paul in particular, but also with Mr. Garza, provided a sense of constancy and sort of a stable thread throughout some of those experiences that you had.
Definitely for Paul. Mr. Garza was like a caveman hitting you on the head. like just knocking some sense into you. And just very clearly, he was just like, you're a rough case. There's a lot of teachers who did not want to have you in their class.
Mm,
But I see in you great potential, but you have to make those choices. And it was literally that quick for me. He said, you have to make those choices. And I thought, you mean I have power?
mm,
This is the first time in my life I was like, I get some say in this tragedy, and I can turn it into something different.
mhm,
And it was immediately like, we had that conversation. The next day I saw a kid who was getting picked on and getting his head flushed down the toilet, and
mm,
I stood up for him.
mhm,
And from then on, that was my life.
mm.
So, and it
It's
still is.
it's
I
a
have
really
parents.
powerful
Go ahead.
lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, go
Yeah.
ahead. About parents.
Well, so I have parents today. I've found myself a parental advocate,
Mm,
and I have parents who send me messages regularly about what's going on in their schools and being gaslit by teachers and administration, um, and standing up for them when I want to just say, come on, you can do this for yourself, right? Like you can do this. But so many people are so afraid of the current culture,
mhm,
um, that I'm not as afraid. I mean, I still like my knees still quake, and
mhm.
but I'm much more afraid of what will happen if we don't stand.
Well, and it is so intimidating to stand up to something that's so sure of itself.
Right.
And this the people who are buying the ideology are so sure of themselves. They're so aggressively sure that it is intimidating. I can understand why the parents would feel that way. I have certainly felt that way as well.
But it doesn't make sense that they're sure of themselves because there's no logic behind it. And they literally say that logic is whiteness.
Mhm.
So then they don't have to,
They don't have to even answer
the
fundamental
burden of
questions
proof is
about their
never
belief
on
system.
them.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
then flashing forward to 2020, your what you said about, you had never really seen yourself, you hadn't experienced life in this really it I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you had a new racialization of your experiences, of your dynamics with other people. You describe your experiences with, Paul and with Mr. Garza, and you mentioned some characteristics of them that it's a pretty diverse. I mean, to use in the modern parlance, we talk about diversity and multiculturalism, and it's like you're interacting with people from different backgrounds and used to having relationships across different identity categories without too much difficulty
I
relating
would
to
say that,
people, would you say? No?
yeah, I would say the difficulty that I had, um, was the difficulty that lots of people have who are growing up as minorities, especially in places where there's not a lot of minorities.
Okay.
So there was a time in my life when I definitely wished I was white when I was a little girl, even when it came to dating, I was afraid to let a boy know that I liked him because one boy I let know that. And well, actually, it's one of those things where a friend tells a friend,
Mm.
and the friend said, "Oh, she's cute and everything, but I like my bread white, not toasted."
Oh, wow.
That's that's the reality of,
Mhm,
life.
mhm,
There was one boy, I might have shared this story before, I'm not sure, where he would not drink out of the water fountain that I drink out of.
mm,
And it my friends were so upset. They were so upset with him. And then he said, well, he didn't say anything. I was just kind to him. I
mhm.
was just kind to everybody. And so at the end of the year, he grabbed my yearbook and he's like, "Can I write in it?" And I'm kind of afraid to let him write in it 'cause that's forever. And he wrote, "I was wrong."
Wow.
I've had those experiences multiple times in my life where
Mhm,
people have opinions about what minorities must be like,
mhm,
what specifically Black people must be like. And I've even went as far as to say, I'm not even Black, I'm
mhm,
biracial.
mhm,
If you cut an apple in half, there's two sides of an apple. I'm just equally this as I am this. But really, who I am is just me.
mhm,
And so that was my experience. The majority of people didn't care. once in a while people would care. And if they were ugly about it, you just walk away and charge them with being stupid. So,
So you didn't
but
take that on yourself.
no, no, I
Mhm,
could have taken on so much for myself. And that is such an, I mean, that's immutable, right? Like that is who I am. And it wasn't until I got into college. I did go to college for a year and then I went to an actor studio after that. But it wasn't until I got into college that I embraced being brown, just in that, I'm exotic and I can play a billion different things and nobody knows what I am until I open up my mouth and tell them.
mhm,
And it was just, it never was really an issue. And when I got into the city, I mean, there were like men who wanted to date me as a notch in their belt.
mm.
That's a reality.
Tokenization again.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm,
And so that's a reality.
mhm,
But I don't think it's any worse than anyone else's experience.
mm,
I wasn't extremely bullied in school. Um, I I had hell at home, but my school life wasn't what so many people's is. I never would experience things like cutting
mhm,
or anorexia or bulimia or
mhm,
being like extremely overweight. None of that was a
mhm,
part of my growing up. And so I look at those and I say, well, that's just as bad.
mm,
And I know people will go, well, no, because you're a 9 on the aces, so you've
mhm,
had it really, really bad. But I can't negate their experiences.
mhm.
That seems like then you're not really thinking about people as being human beings.
And for anybody who doesn't know, the ACE score is the Adverse Childhood Events Score, and it's a way of looking at experiences that people will have had before a certain age of development and how that can impact a person's trajectory. And it's a 9 is a very high score. What is the total? I mean, is it 9 out of
I think
9
they've
or is it out of
changed
10?
it. I,
Okay.
I think they've changed it, but it was 10.
Okay. Yeah.
So the only thing that hadn't happened is no one had been killed in front of me. Um,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
a list of terrible things that you wouldn't want to have happen to any child.
Yeah.
So it's a real testament to your resilience of spirit that you can talk about that just and have come from what you've come from, just knowing that that you've been through that many difficult experiences in your life and still have the optimism that you have.
Well, it's really upsetting that they teach the ACE score because then they do project onto people.
Mm,
They basically give them a reason. If
mm,
I've lived in 18 foster homes, how many foster brothers and sisters do you think I've had?
mm,
A lot.
mhm,
And none of them walked away okay because they bought into the world owes me.
mhm,
Um, and because the world owed them, and instead of figuring out that they can, I know people hate that statement about picking yourself up by your bootstraps,
mhm,
but that's the reality. The reality is you walk into a place and you've got your coupon of food stamps. I'm dating myself here, but you've
mhm,
got your food stamps and you stand in the line and you see the people whispering and your choice is to not care if they're whispering, um to get upset and like yell at them for mocking you or whatever, um or to go, I don't want these, and to
mhm,
look outside and to go, oh look, Taco Bell's hiring, I'm going to go get a job.
mhm,
And then you move from Taco Bell to, for me, Taco Bell to receptionist to
mhm,
whatever, eventually getting married.
mhm,
But you have your choices, and when they take away your agency and break you, they are infantilizing you. They're
mhm.
treating you like a baby. I don't understand why anybody would want that in their lives.
No, I know, and it's such a difficult thing because when people have been through difficult experiences, some very traumatic experiences, there's the temptation to fall into resentment is very strong. And it's based on something that's very valid. It's that you're grieving and you have pain and you want somehow for that to be made better. And for someone, the sometimes it's a person you can think of who hurt you and you want that person to make you whole again. And the hard fact is that it's often not going, I mean, it's very rare for that to come from something external. It's going to have to be internal resources that we draw on. And it's hard to say that to someone because it sounds uncaring. But when we realize it for ourselves, it is very liberating.
Right. Isn't that funny? They use terms like liberation when they want to basically chain you up.
Mm.
These the mental chains that they want to put on you so that you can't do for yourself.
Mhm.
When the reality is that the kindest thing you can do for a person is give them the steps,
Mm.
right? So you lay it out and you stand next to them, especially like as a parent. You say, okay, well, you're not doing well in this, so let's figure out the ways to help you get there.
Mhm.
But the problem is that if you help somebody too much, that is possible. And if you help somebody too much, it can be a cruelty because
Mhm.
then they don't believe in their ability to do something for themselves.
Yeah, that's very well said. And so going back to what you said about 2020 and how people started to treat you differently and you started to feel like a difference in the way that you were being communicated with. I I think that's a fascinating topic to explore. I it seems so unhealthy that we've got all these people out there saying white people are racist because what that says is it says to white people we can read your mind, but what it says to anybody else is they don't like you. White people don't like you, like you're being judged. And so it's like this double-edged sword that's or it's even worse than that. It's like it's a hurt cutting two directions.
Right.
And it's making everybody fearful of each other and everybody intimidated by communication. And it doesn't seem like it seems like it's adding something very destructive. And that it sounds like that's what you're speaking to.
It's going backwards. It's
Mm.
going backwards. So I was telling you about this, and I just will tell this story.
Mhm.
I went to my son's school conference, and a teacher said, I know I can tell you this. I know you'll be a person who can accept this, which in its way is kind of gaslighting because you're assuming what I'm going to feel about this. But the person said that she was proud to see my son embracing his blackness
Mhm.
because he's playing a character in a play who's not black, but because he's powerful and he speaks back, it's Newsies. So because he is this leader, she perceives that as blackness.
So
And this
she's
is a white,
stereotyping his behavior and calling that black.
yes.
Okay.
And that's really tricky because I go out and speak at groups, talk to senators. I'm doing a debate against DEI next week. And just talking to a person one on one about it is so frightening
And
because
this is a white lady you were saying.
I would honestly say, I mean, a young person. This
Okay.
this is a young person, and um, my heart hurts for this person because she's being taught that what she's doing is enlightened, right? So she's been taught at school that what she's doing is compassionate and enlightened, and she sees more than others do, um and what I see is somebody who is being taught to be racist. Now, there are people who don't like the term racist and think you're being judgmental. I'm not, because I understand and I have compassion. I have great compassion for the fact that this young woman has been taught to see color and for it to matter so much that she would identify these characters of strength and resilience. He is the lead, and so it's Jack Kelly, right? So this character of strength and resilience, but the other boy who's playing it doesn't have a biracial mother.
Mm.
So it's not blackness for him.
Mm.
And how do you have that conversation with people? Because you need to. we have to have these conversations because um they're being taught, these people coming out of academia are being taught that what they're doing is compassionate, and they are really pushing people back down.
Mm.
I do not want my child to ever see who he is based on the color or lack thereof of his skin, because my son could be your son. He's very pale and
Mhm.
freckly, and nobody would even know that he's biracial if I wasn't his mom walking around with him all the time.
Mm.
So, yeah.
And so this, as you say, you're used to engaging in these conversations and discussing them with people who are addressing the philosophy behind it. But when
Yes.
you're actually entering into a one-on-one and someone is sort of using applied CRT with you directly, it's
It's
it's a
just
whole
as
nother
scary as it
ballgame.
is for anyone else.
Yeah.
You sit there and of course, like, the first thing that you want to say is, "Whoa, what?
Yeah.
Excuse me?" But
Yeah.
then as soon as you say that, you are, if you're me, you are the angry Black woman,
Mm.
right? So everything has to be tempered under, okay, I don't want people to see me that way. And I want to reach this person and talk to this person with love,
Mhm.
because it's not their fault. This is no different than what was happening in China.
Mm.
The Red Guard wasn't a bunch of evil people. They were people who were brainwashed basically from cradle to grave. And that's what we're doing to our kids. So,
Yeah, and that makes me think of something that Ben Harris said the other day when I was speaking with him. I don't know if you had a chance, but if you do have a chance to watch that, I thought his the conversation was great. He added some perspectives that I hadn't thought before. There's some new ways of framing things. But one of the things that he said just very offhandedly was um, he corrected himself when he made a reference to somebody being a racist or a misogynist. And he says, no, well, people aren't racists or misogynist. People are people that some of them have racist or misogynist tendencies or qualities or something like that. So I thought that was an important qualifier because it is so we're in this time of such extremes,
right.
and the labeling is really um off the hook with this stuff. I mean, it's really in this tendency to throw people away for one act or for one way of thinking. And I think that your point about how young people are being taught is really well made. And I've had the same thought that there's a core of truth in all of this. And when you talk about have having to like censor yourself so as not to be the angry Black woman, there's a schema in your head, and there's a thing in your mind that you're trying to avoid because you've learned to think about this as something that you and it's something that not everybody goes through life having to think about. So it's
Right.
a different set of considerations that people will have based on their background or their experiences. And so there's a core of truth in all the things that are being attempted to be addressed by this, but it's the way that it's being implemented, and the if you'll forgive the expression, the black and white thinking is just it's very reductive, and it's missing a lot of the nuance in human experience and conversation.
Well, and that's the thing about the nuance is that um, just because a Black person a Black woman has to worry about being called the angry Black woman
Mhm.
doesn't mean that there aren't stereotypes that, I mean, for me, a much bigger thing than the fact that that I am of color is that I grew up so poor.
Mhm.
So I'm always working towards, oh no, we do not dress like slobs in our family. We do not, image matters. Not
Mhm.
not in like a super shallow sort of way, but I don't want anybody to think of me as a charity case.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and I think that's more universal. I think that class becomes more of a conversation that people can have that isn't um that allows the conversation to be brought to the table.
Mhm.
Because when you bring race to the table, you are assuming that behind every closed door of a Black person or a Mexican person or an Asian person, that their lives are exactly the same in every single home. And
Mhm.
that's no different than it is in white homes.
Yeah.
They can be, you may go to the same church, you may eat the same kinds of food for dinner, but it doesn't mean that you're watching the same thing on TV. It doesn't mean that you have the same study habits. None of that is the same. And so we are losing humanity. But then the
Mhm.
other thing is that I do think at the top, there are some pretty vile racists up there at the top. There are people who know what they're doing and they want the conversation to
Mhm.
be let's obsess let's obsess over race.
Mhm. Divide
Um,
and conquer.
yes.
Mhm.
So I feel like for the majority of people, we're just trying to do the best we can.
Mhm.
But there are people who want us divided, and race is a really color is a really easy way to do that, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, and your point about how the experience of poverty impacts your interactions and your self-perception and your self-presentation, that's my mom grew up in and out of the foster system. Her mom was institutionalized a few times during her childhood, and just it's a really complex story, but she went through a she had a very high ACE score. She went through a lot as a kid, and she was the recipient of charity over and over as a kid in foster care, and then from church charities and stuff. And so for her, it was a similar thing. She had such a it was so important to present a certain way, and we grew up poor too, but not to the extent that what she had gone through. But there was always that consideration for her of not, we very much had to avoid looking like white trash was, kind of the way you would have put it where I was from. And where I'm from also, white was the minority. And so some of those other experiences, like people not wanting to date me, families, I had a boyfriend in high school whose family didn't like me because I was white, and people would switch to Spanish around me so that I wouldn't hear. And, you know, those experiences are like they transcend these superficial
Exactly.
characteristics. You don't know something of substance about somebody just from looking at their skin. And it's crazy that in 2023 we have to say that.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. We have all of these diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas, but
Mhm.
we can't sit down and have a conversation to find the common thread
Mhm.
because that's what would help.
Mhm.
That is ultimately what would help, and that would make it so that when I walk down the halls, I'm not afraid. I mean, I have places where I go when I work at the school or other places where I want to be the last one to leave because in my head I'm thinking they're saying things about me,
Mm.
even though
Mhm.
wonderful human beings, great people, but in my head I'm thinking, oh well, I can leave so they can have the real conversation. I never
Mhm.
thought that way before. I never thought that way before. And
Wow.
what they've done really is somebody, I think it was your co-host Aaron, I
Mhm.
think he said that there's a book called The Rape of the Mind.
Yeah, I
I
remember him mentioning that. Yeah, I
I
haven't
have
read it.
not
Mm.
gotten that out of my head because
Mm.
that's exactly what it's like. You're just
Mhm.
like, I did not consent to this.
Mm.
This is not the world that I want. And the fact that that we're giving in to the Antifa crowd, that we're giving in to people who, I'm gonna get myself in trouble and be blunt, but who are sitting downstairs playing video games, doing whatever else they're doing, and then getting out and going and fighting and demanding and saying, you owe me, you owe me, you owe me. And I'm just like, shut up, shut up. We're tired of it.
Mhm.
We're and what do you get in the end? They don't even know what they get. That's the whole point. They don't even know what they're fighting for
Mm.
because they don't want. I've talked to enough people who've escaped communism to know that they don't want what they're going for.
Yeah, that is an interesting point because it doesn't seem like it has an end point, what we're dealing with right now. One of the things that I've noticed and a lot of people have addressed is this whole idea of like the white privilege thing, and that the white person is automatically racist and automatically, has all these, there's this whiteness that needs to be rooted out. But going through these trainings doesn't absolve you. So
No,
there's no absolution except in your death, I suppose, because you don't get, and this sounds ridiculous to say it, but you don't get like some white person badge where you're like, been through DEI, I'm good now, or something.
it's
So
continuous.
it's a perpetual experience of like self-flagellation. And then, but what is it like on the other side? What's the BIPOC, as they call it? If and this is another thing, and this is a trivial point perhaps, but there's this really it's such a microaggression to say non-white, to say white and non-white. Now that's not okay. But everything, but when you use like an acronym like BIPOC, how is that not as dehumanizing as just non-white? I mean, how is that not the same thing? It's just you replace the word. So I don't know if I'm articulating that very well, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the first thing is that these people are always projecting
Mhm.
constantly. So when they say, if you don't X, you are erasing us. If you don't X, you are erasing us. So we must be, um, what is it? Center around the marginalized, right?
Right. Yeah.
But those marginalized must think the exact same way. Because when you
Yeah.
don't think just like them, they erase you.
And then you're considered white adjacent or something like that, or that
Or
you've
not considered at
internalized
all.
white supremacy.
Or not considered at all.
Mhm.
Or you go to Congress to speak and you've driven 2 hours to get there, and they say, we recognize that there are minorities in the room, but they don't speak for their collective.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That has that actually been said about
Yes.
that? That's an experience you had.
Not me, but it's
Okay.
something that people in my group have, and it has been recorded.
They don't speak for their collective.
They don't speak for their collective.
Wow.
The woman that I'm debating next week is the person who said it.
Oh gosh.
Okay, um so erasing us is the goal. And they start off with, just erasing you. You don't
Mhm.
have a voice. They marginalize, not marginalize, they do the best to keep your algorithm out so that people aren't hearing you.
Mhm.
People
Mhm.
will constantly say, why don't you speak at this? And other people will say they don't want to hear her voice, and they don't,
Wow.
because it's I put to sleep a lot of their narratives. So, and I understand that. Um, sorry, you had asked another part. What was the second part
Well,
of it?
it seems like there's the dichotomy in their argument is that you either are all for CRT or you don't believe racism exists and race is not a factor.
Right.
And that's not, I think that's a false dichotomy, because you can have a nuanced view of how people interact with one another based on race. And you can understand that there are all kinds of disparities in and experiences that are going to be influenced by racial and ethnic background and community, um, population demographics, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's just so varied and so complex. I
Yeah.
think that that false dichotomy is a real problem here.
Yeah. Well, you have to think about it like this. Within the Black culture, it is whiteness to get an education.
Mhm.
Most people are shamed if they are intelligent. If they read, that Black men get bullied if they want to go to school. Women, it's a different story, but for Black boys especially. So you are not coming to the table with a lot of reason. You might have common sense, but they've really tried to beat that out of you. They've tried to turn you into political pawns who you don't have to think. You just have to know that you do what you're supposed to do.
Where do you
Um,
think that comes from? And I'm going to ask that because where I grew up, it was a real underachiever mentality. Like I
yeah,
got made fun of so bad when I played violin for a year that I was embarrassed to play it. And you just you didn't want to be in the honors classes. You didn't want to be the smart kid. that was really bad. It was an ugly look to be a nerd or to be intelligent. And I didn't grow up where I grew up. The racial makeup was mostly Hispanic. There was probably a similar minority of Black and white kids.
Yeah.
But it's that same underachiever culture. That
Well,
where do you think that comes from?
well, there are people who've always wanted us to be allegiant to the state,
Mm,
right? Since the Rockefellers. So if they've always wanted us to be allegiant to the state, they need people on the bottom who don't believe in their capabilities. So when I talk about systemic racism, because I do think it's systemic, but I think it's more systemic classism.
mm,
Maybe it's both.
mm,
Um, but systemic racism is telling that child who comes to school as a 5-year-old, you can't really, I mean, there's so many obstacles in your way, being thrilled when your child gets a C+ on a paper and being like, here, ready, here you go. And you're just like, I'm not happy with that.
mhm,
If that is the grade that my child mentally is capable of, I'm fine with that.
mhm,
But if it's because they're a slacker,
mhm,
then I want you to help raise them up. I don't want it to be okay because, well, that's what's expected of these kids. And so you have these people down at the bottom who that's what's expected of them. And that's what teachers have been taught to expect from them.
mhm,
And
mhm.
that has been the most shocking thing, because I used to be the biggest supporter of teachers. If a teacher needs a coffee, just let me know, because I will run to the store and grab them. Anytime you need a volunteer, I'm there all the time.
Mhm,
Um, and I feel bad for them because I know that there are excellent teachers who hate this and who feel like they're taken hostage.
mhm,
But these younger ones, and not all of them. I do have younger people who are studying to be teachers now who send me information and they're like, "What's going on?"
oh, that's
Um,
good.
I do.
Mhm,
It's amazing. And I'm religious and I pray for them.
mhm,
We need to. So you've got them. You've got this dichotomy of people who have been taught that education is bad, right?
mhm,
And then you have this other group of people who do achieve, and they become the leaders. But in order to be leaders, they need followers, and the way that they have their followers is to keep that other group down.
mm,
And I think that there is an internal, hugely within the Black race, that's been taught to them to hate themselves.
mm,
And when you go in and you try to lift that up, they despise you. They really do. And it
mm,
is it is hard because um I don't have all the answers, but I am a thinker, and I am a person who, I do have a lot of compassion, and I do see that there are alternatives and ways that we could actually raise everyone instead of making everybody hate each other. Because here's the thing. Oh, that's it. You said, where does this end? That was the thing.
mhm, mm,
Okay, here's the thing. Once you get rid of all the white people that have caused all your problems, then you start looking at your neighbors and they caused your problems. So it
mm,
never ends. When you are taught a constant, steady resentment is what you are fed.
mhm.
And that is what they're fed. When you are taught a constant thing of resentment, and that's critical resentment theory. Now, I don't even call it critical race theory,
Wow, I like that.
critical resentment theory.
Mm,
And when you're taught that, it doesn't just end the second all the white people are dead, or the second all the white people are out picking cotton, because I've literally seen people say that this ends when white people are in slavery, right? So it doesn't end at that point, because you already hate. Hate
mm,
is kind of the center of your heart.
mm,
So, and the people on the top don't want it to ever end, because that could threaten their power. And it's really all comes down to power. We think that it's a black and white issue, as you said.
mhm.
but it's ultimately a power in the haves and have-nots.
Mhm. Yeah, I think um, that's well stated, and it is a bleak thought. I mean, the concept of the purity spiral, where you eliminate the offensive thing, but then as you spiral inwards, you find more and more offense. So it would be like eliminate the whites and then eliminate the biracial people and then so on and so forth, and then eliminate any anything that reminds you of them and on until you cannibalize your own forces, really.
Just like we've done through history.
And so you mentioned that you know, you have some thoughts on how we could be doing this in a way that uplifts everybody. And so that I'm really interested in hearing what you think about that because, there, as I keep coming back to this, there, it's not, it's a, it's a false way to address a real problem. It's a terrible way to address something that is at its heart something real, which is the tension, the disparity, and the reality of life in a country with a lot of different with a diverse racial and ethnic background where people experience life or can tend to experience life differently depending on who they are and where they are. And as you say, there's so many factors. Poverty is a huge one, and many, many more, too many to just list. But um, I think that one of the reasons why this has taken hold is that it's speaking to something people think is real, and because it is.
Mhm.
But again, it's a really destructive way to speak to that, and a really destructive way to orient oneself. So, what are your thoughts on ways that we could do this in a more productive manner and have the kinds of conversations that would really be enriching for people's lives?
Well, the first thing I think of, I always come back to the whole George Floyd thing.
Mhm,
When George Floyd came out and people said, "Don't ask questions." To ask questions is whiteness. To ask questions is showing your white superiority. Um, no, people should have been able to ask questions. We should never take questions off the table. When we're having equity meetings, you shouldn't get a priority to get to speak longer because of the color of your skin. Everyone should have the exact same time because that's how we say everyone has equal value. And that's what they say is the goal.
mhm,
So really maybe if we took the proclaimed goals of DEI and actually applied them with reason,
mhm,
they would make sense. The problem is that they're a lie. They're a manipulation and they're also masochistic.
mhm,
So instead of, I mean, I really do think that that's it. We bring all the people into the room and it's not just the Hispanic child who's saying, "Oh, all these white people in town, they bully me."
mhm,
It's also the white child being able to say, "I'm afraid to make eye contact because I don't want to get punched in the bathroom."
mhm,
Because that's the reality, and everyone should be able to feel that way. Or kids should be able to say things like, um, I feel a lot of pressure to not do well in school because in my culture, we don't do well in school,
mhm,
and then a white child should be able to say, if this is their situation, um, you know, my parents don't care about this. My dad's in prison, right? So,
mhm,
and a black child should be able to say, I don't relate to this because I live on the upper upper crust side and my parents are doctors.
mhm,
And none of that should be shamed. The gay child should be able to say, I don't think it's my teacher's business who I sleep with
mhm,
or who I want to sleep with. I
mhm.
think it's creepy. You're old. I'm not. Like they should be able to have
Yeah.
honest conversations that we aren't letting them have
Mhm,
because the goal of this stuff is division. So and we also have to not be afraid of it. So I taught for the month of February, I taught Black history and excellence And you would get people saying, I don't think you should touch that. Black history is American history. 85% of me agrees with that.
Mm.
But if we're going to teach Black history, and they are, then we have to be able to combat their stories of policing has always been racist, to stories about covert Michigan, where police managed the town and they were Black. They were Black freed and escaped slaves, and they managed the town. And there was interracial marriage, and there were Black judges. You have to be able to have truth in these conversations. We are stripping truth away, like science versus the science, race conversations versus the appropriate race conversations. No, we have to teach our children, and we have to be willing, and we're dumb. We are as parents in our 40-ish areas, right? We are raised by this. And this makes us stupid. So we're dumb, and we think, it's easy. And so our kids aren't being taught to critically think. And so we have to go backwards, and we have to teach our kids to critically think. We have to teach our kids life isn't handed to you. You aren't owed anything by anyone. And the great journey of life is to become mature, not to go backwards and become infants that need to be taken care of. I think that's a universal truth that if we all had, we would be in better shape.
So it's really about honoring the experience of the individual and not silencing people based on your preconceptions of what they will have to say or should have to say, and in bringing to the table all the voices and allowing the cultural space for the sharing of the widely varied experiences that people will have had without shaming them based on preset expectations.
Yeah, it's like if you just took a list and said, what are the characteristics of a good human being? And then looked around and saw that in other people, we would be a whole lot better off than projecting what we think on others.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I think that's very encouraging that you're hearing, for instance, from young teachers that are seeing things the way that you do and that are seeing your work and reaching out to you. Do you have a sense of optimism for where we're going, or are you concerned? And what are your, where are you with that as you look towards the future?
I'm very, very, very concerned. I believe that the only way to save anything is to go backwards. I do. I think that we need to go backwards and find, why was it, Martin Luther King may have had issues and been somewhat problematic in certain ways, but why was it that we appreciate what he said? Because it resonated with all of us, because we should not be looking at people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And character is important. And we have to teach our kids that character is important. I think that a lot of our millennials and a lot of our Gen Zers, that's not today, right? Or Gen X, anyways, whatever. Not our children today. Okay, our children who are still under our own roofs, I think we have a lot of hope for. I think they watched the last couple of years and were like, that makes no sense. And so we still have that power as long as we keep it. But we are in a war. That's what I think. I think we're in a war, and I don't know if we win. For me, again, as a person of faith, I believe in the end I win anyways. I just would prefer not to go through all the messy stuff, but we're in the messy stuff. So the hope comes from knowing that we can literally start today. You can
Mhm.
literally today take your kids and have conversations with them and don't hide any of the truth from them.
Mhm.
Because if you hide the truth from them, if you don't steep them in truth, they're going to walk out into their classrooms and they're going to be told a bunch of lies. School counselors are going to get their hands on them.
Mhm.
And that is probably the scariest thing I can think of. So, as far as I'm concerned, the person that I am, there's always hope,
Mhm.
but I'm also a realist. And if parents don't take action and don't kind of, grab their armor and put a shield around them, their families,
Mhm.
then I'm really concerned about where we're headed.
And you held up your phone a little while ago to make a point about how they're making us dumb, and I I couldn't agree more. And I personally, this is just my own little plug for taking your kids off screens as much as possible. Screen-free childhood to the degree you can. I think and that's just my 2 cents. I'll just leave that there.
Yeah,
But do you have any final thoughts, or do you wanna give some resources or plug your channel or tell people where they can follow the work that you're doing?
sure. Yeah. My channel could be found. It's called Be Not Afraid, but if you're looking for it, it's under Carob Marcelle on YouTube. Um, Alvin Louis has done amazing work with oh no, I've lost my train of thought. Courage is a Habit, the Courage is a Habit podcast. It really shows you what is going on. And you need to realize, again, that this is a war, which means that people will lie straight to your face. So um, trust your gut, but also just do everything you can to educate yourself. Another person that I highly recommend listening to, like everywhere I drive, I'm listening to, is James Lindsay.
Mhm.
Always, because I want to understand what's going on. Because if you aren't smart enough to understand how they're thinking, then you can't combat it. Because it's like a what is that? That creature with many arms,
Like an
and,
octopus?
or a snake. This
Okay,
snake with
yeah,
multiple
yeah.
heads, right? A hydra.
Yeah, a
Finally,
hydra, a hydra. Yeah, okay, yeah.
yes. So it's like a hydra, and the more you cut off, the more that keep
Yep.
growing. And
Mhm.
also find your people,
Mhm.
find your tribe, and the way you find your tribe is by speaking up. And don't care if people tell you you're crazy and you need to wear a foil hat. Just find your tribe and hold them close.
I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful advice. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I have enjoyed every time we've talked, and I really appreciate you weighing in, and good luck with your debate next week.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
That is great that you're doing that and getting out there and being brave and giving a voice to all these more complex thoughts than what we're hearing, and more serious. And I echo your concerns, and also your hope. So thank
Right.
you again, Carrie.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.